Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace. Sorry, I'll say that again. I couldn't compete with the blast from outside. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Friday, July the 2nd, 2021. I was searching something on Google, well, not Google, and DuckDuckGo yesterday, and I found something that I didn't know about, which was interesting. It's from a website called Affirmative Right, Wikipedia, who's who in the dissident right. And there's some people that I've heard of and a bunch of people that I haven't heard of. And I don't know why all these people are linked together for some reason, but to my surprise, I found my own name there. Let's see. Elderly Irish Welsh Canadian curmudgeon, well known for his bitter boomerism and looking like a less masculine version of Joe Biden, got his big break late in life by co-hosting the Luke Ford Show, but he now has his own show on YouTube where he basically moans about low-hanging fruit news stories mixed in with pretentious and occasionally incisive pontifications on films and literature. He has often had accommodation problems in the past, leading to frequent grifting and cries for help. Okay, and then I thought, where have I seen this affirmative right before? Oh yes, that's Colin Liddell, who I've had some experience with. And I gather that Colin Liddell doesn't like the Irish or the Welsh, or maybe both of them. Curmudgeon, yeah, sure, if you like. A bitter boomerism, yeah, okay, if you like. A less masculine version of Joe Biden, I don't know what to make about that. This is my original face, you know. It's not been cut. I don't have the Joker look. Basically moans about low-hanging fruit news stories. I suppose that there's a certain amount of truth to that. I could make this show more esoteric, more pretentiously intellectual, but the idea was that I actually wanted people to tune in. So I talk about what's in the news, and especially these days, many news stories are what might be described as low-hanging fruit. Often had accommodation problems in the past, leading to frequent grifting and cries for help. Yeah, I suppose that is fair enough. I don't charge anyone for this, and I ask for donations, and kind people send them to me. It's really not that much of a grift. I was reminded Colin Liddell would occasionally appear on Luke Ford's show, and Colin Liddell supposedly lives in Japan. I say supposedly because whenever Luke asked him about Japan, what's happening in Japan, his response was, well, yeah, pretty much the same, which I found a very odd answer because Westerners typically find Japan endlessly fascinating and strange. So if you're in Japan speaking to a Western audience, obviously you'd have a lot to say, but he never did. I remember I asked him once about Nissan, the car company, and it being taken over by a Frenchman from Renault, I believe. And I asked whether there was any resentment in Japan over that. And he said, no, 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 no. And I thought, yeah, I'm not buying that. I am not buying that. And then when Carlos Ghosn had his downfall, I noticed there was a lot of schadenfreude in the Japanese media about this. So it would appear that Colin Liddell was wrong. But we had a set to once on Luke Ford's show when he was talking up the Morgenthau plan, which, if you remember, was the idea was basically to turn Germany into a giant pasture. I pointed out that this would have resulted in the death by starvation of 30 to 40 million Germans. Yes, and controversially, I maintain my lonely stand against mass murder. And Colin Liddell didn't seem to be put out by that idea. I mentioned to him later that to Morgenthau, FDR cited an intelligence report that warned that Europe might starve if it could no longer buy German-made farm machinery. And Morgenthau's response was, in the words of your son Johnny, so what? Yeah, there's a lot of talk of genocide today, real or imagined. But Henry Morgenthau planned genocide for the German people, and luckily he was overruled by FDR. Let's have a look at the chat. Thank you for your birthday wish, Anrun, Pelcasso 88, and Dan. Head McNeck says, yes, fire engine putting Kevin on blast. Pelcasso 88 says, avenge Captain Cook. I will get to that shortly. Hello to Contiki Roulette. Anrun says, avenge Queen Victoria. Ditto. Contiki Roulette says, why don't they criticize these low-hanging fruit news stories then? Why is that Kevin's problem that they are dumb? Hello to Franz. Thank you. And thank you to our valiant moderator, Chad Chadson, for your greeting and for your valiant service. Hello to Oscar Toe, Texas Feral Hog. And let's see. Kontiki Roulette says he lived above a Japanese takeout in Baltimore. Texas Feral Hog says, how does it feel to be 70? Well, I'm not quite 70. I am 66. Anrun says, so Colin L has been fibbing this whole time? I don't know. I don't know about that. It's just that it would seem to be strange to live in Japan, you know, as a Westerner, as a Briton, and not seem to pay any attention to it or not find it particularly interesting. I mean, why would you live in Japan if you weren't interested in Japan? You know, I know that, you know, Japanese who were born there, well, they live in Japan, but he chose to go there. Hello to Alex DeLarge and Brandon Smith, Yo Mama, Glib Medley. Oscar Toe says, I agree that is pretty suspect. I don't know. I got into some flame war with him, Colin Liddell, and I recall the word fed being used. I'm not calling him one. I have no knowledge of that, but he gives off a scent of that. So let's talk about the war on white. Let's talk about the end of Canada. After a week more of Catholic churches being burned down in Canada, our leader, Justin Trudeau, decided, I guess he had to say something. I was looking at his Twitter feed yesterday, and there was a tweet honoring Portuguese Heritage Day. There was a tweet condemning anti-Semitism. And I thought, is it seriously possible that Trudeau is not going to mention all of the churches that have been burned down? Well, he didn't until today. This is from Rachel Gilmore at Global News. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is speaking out against multiple acts of vandalism that have taken place across Canada, from the burning of churches to red paint being splattered across buildings and toppled statues. It is unacceptable and wrong that acts of vandalism and arson are being seen across the country, including against Catholic churches. Oh, I love that, including. I understand the anger that's out there against the federal government, against institutions like the Catholic Church. It is real and it's fully understandable, given the shameful history that we are all becoming more and more aware of and engaging ourselves to do better as Canadians. You see, that's a curious kind of denunciation where you justify the crimes. Fully understandable, shameful history. Yes, yes, yes. In recent days, 4 small Catholic churches on Indigenous lands in rural southern British Columbia have been destroyed by suspicious fires, and a vacant former Anglican church in northwestern BC was recently damaged in what the RCMP said could be arson. 2 recent incidents on the Siksika First Nation in Alberta are also under investigation. Alberta's RCMP is also investigating the burning of the Saint Jean Baptiste Parish Church, which unfolded on Wednesday. The RCMP in Indian Brook, Nova Scotia, are investigating a suspicious fire that damaged a Roman Catholic church on Wednesday. In addition to the fires, churches and statues have been targeted in other ways in recent days. Calgary's police service is investigating the vandalism of 10 different churches that they say took place overnight on June the 30th. Sounds rather coordinated, does it not? Criminal conspiracy. Orange and red paint was placed on the exterior of the churches, and one had a window smashed so paint could be thrown inside, read a release from the city of Calgary. Handprints, the number 215, and other markings suggest that vandalism was in response to the graves recently found at former residential schools. We don't know what's there in Kamloops. That was the first story, and we're never going to know because there's not going to be an exhumation. 2 prominent buildings in St. John's, Newfoundland, and a statue dedicated to the local police force were also recently vandalized with bright red paint, and the statues of Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth were toppled on the grounds of the Manitoba legislature during a Thursday rally in Winnipeg. All of the aforementioned incidents are still under investigation. Yes, speaking Friday, Trudeau warned that the incidents at churches could be robbing families of a source of comfort in the wake of the horrific discovery. We shouldn't be lashing out at buildings that can provide solace to some of our fellow citizens. Yes, the concept of sacrilege means nothing to Justin Trudeau. Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole also spoke out about the incidents Friday. This is not the road to reconciliation. Reconciliation builds up our country. Actions like this tear down and destroy. I believe in Canada, and that includes our ability to meaningfully address our past, while securing a future that includes everyone. Yes, see, the problem with the desecration of churches is, again, not the sacrilege, but that it might slow down the sacred cause of reconciliation. Politicians aren't the only ones speaking out about the recent events. In a video posted to YouTube Tuesday, Arthur Noski, the Treaty 8 First Nations of Alberta Grand Chief, pleaded with the members of the community to leave the churches alone because the destruction of these buildings could take important evidence down with them. They're storing records regarding residential schools in churches. Once again, the problem with burning down churches is that it might destroy evidence that's going to lead to more gibs for us. National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Perry Bellegarde, voiced a similar sentiment in a press conference Wednesday. I can understand the frustration and the anger, and I would say that burning things down is not the way to proceed. I would say that building things up would be the better way to proceed and build relationships. I can understand the frustration, the anger, and the hurt and the pain. There's no question, but to burn things down is not our way. 2 of the churches that were vandalized in this series of incidents were Ukrainian Catholic churches, but these churches provide important supports for the community, especially during the heat wave that's hitting Western Canada. Roman Zakolnizny, chairman of the Ukrainian Catholic Civil Liberties Association, told Global News. So you're chairman of the Ukrainian Catholic Civil Liberties Association, but apparently the most important thing about your churches being desecrated is not the sacrilege, but people need a cool place during the heat wave. Apparently they do. The heat in Calgary is overwhelming, and they got woken up on Canada Day with news that they had a cleanup to do. He added that the Ukrainian Catholic Church had nothing to do with the residential school system. Well, it is Christian, isn't it? So I guess that's close enough. So my own city of Victoria, which removed its statue of Johnny MacDonald, which stood for decades in front of City Hall under cover of the night a few years ago. And it canceled Canada Day celebrations because, wicked history, white people, supremacy, genocide, etc., etc. So no one can be surprised by what happened last night. This is from CTV News, Vancouver Island. Protesters pulled down a statue of Captain James Cook and threw the pieces into Victoria's Inner Harbor on Thursday night. The statue of the British explorer, which stood in front of the Empress Hotel, was destroyed shortly after 8:30 p.m. In the statue's place, protesters left behind several wooden red dresses to represent missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, which apparently James Cook had something to do with. The incident followed a gathering of anti-colonial activists at the BC legislature, that's their fault, not mine, to coincide with Canada Day. Victoria police are investigating the damage to the statue. Oh, they are they? There were no Victoria police near there, considering that the legislature is a stone's throw away from where the statue was? No, the police just sat on their hands. Safe, peaceful, and lawful protests are permitted under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, police said in a statement Friday morning. Property damage is not. Police said that there are several suspects in this incident and provided photos of two people they are trying to identify. The statue is owned by the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority, which was already in discussions with the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations about the future of the monument, according to GVHA spokesperson Brian Cant. We stand in solidarity with the Esquimalt Nation and the Songhees Nation, said Cant on Friday. The future of this space will be decided between our organization and the Esquimalt Nation and Songhees Nation, and we will communicate plans for it when the discussion is concluded. In other words, the statue is not going to be replaced. We do not condone vandalism of public or private property and will support the Victoria Police Department in their investigation of this incident, Cant added. Yes. Well, is it a crime if you get away with it and everyone applauds you? That's a good question. Let's see. Breitbart covered this. Jack Montgomery. Woke mobs have ripped down statues of the Queen, her ancestor Queen Victoria, and explorer James Cook in Canada. Winnipeg, Queen Elizabeth down, Canadian flag down, warrior flag up, crowed the Communist Party of Canada on its verified Twitter account, alongside the hashtag Cancel Canada Day and a picture of an activist trampling the vandalized face of Queen Victoria's toppled statue. This is the state legislature building and not a policeman in sight, lamented Robert Pohl of the Stave Our Statues campaign, sharing one of the videos of the large statue of Victoria sitting on a throne being dragged from its plinth. Mob members subsequently took off her head and threw it in a river. The CBC reports that one man was shocked with a stun gun and arrested during the disorder at the Manitoba legislature in Winnipeg, but added that he may not have been a statue toppler. It's possible the arrested man was angry at those who had pulled the statue down at around 4 p.m., the broadcaster noted, adding that a police spokesman had indicated that there may be information forthcoming on Friday. What did the police do? They stood and they watched. Yes, the policemen, oh, we all love the police, do we? Well, the police are now the enforcers of the woke regime. According to Sky News, Queen Victoria statue toppled in Canada. Crowds shouted "No pride in genocide" as the statue was brought down and then kicked. From Siam Hamilton, and who is this person? Tired Indigenous femme, Stolo, and something I cannot pronounce. Yes, by all means, bring your sexuality into this and the fact that you're so very tired. This person tweeted, Captain James Cook statue in Victoria, BC. This was moments before his body was sunk in the Salish Sea by New Cha Nulth youth and friends. The city of Victoria should remove all monuments that celebrate settler colonialism. No pride in genocide. The statue is in front of a wall, a seawall. The seawall, if you go over, it doesn't lead directly to the inner harbor. But there is a rather broad sidewalk there where people walk and admire the yachts. I went down to look at what was there, and I I noticed that, they would have had to move the statue some distance before it could be thrown in the ocean. It was wrapped up. The plinth was wrapped up for some reason. So to prevent further damage to the plinth, yes, good work, civic authorities. Ironically, down on the sidewalk below the wall, there are tables where Indian artisans sell their knickknacks. And I noticed that across the street at the Empress Hotel, that the steps to the hotel were adorned with 8 or 10 different pride flags, despite the fact that Pride Month is over. As my friend Tom Payatic said, those people who disavow colonialism should, in good conscience, disavow the fruits of colonialism, beginning with electricity and antibiotics. Okay, more on this. Oh yeah, did I do the Vice story? Take her down. Protesters toppled Queen Victoria and Elizabeth II statues on Canada Day. This is by Manishna Krishnan. And yes, Vice seemed to find this all very amusing. Very amusing indeed. Shirley Haylaws Semple, who grew up on the Barons River First Nation, was at the demonstration. What happened on Canada Day here was incredible to witness. For the first time ever, we felt powerful on our own lands that we agreed to share with those who wanted to wipe us off the face of the earth. She said Canada was built on genocide. So for us to celebrate the Crown and Canada Day, that is a slap in our face. It's a funny kind of genocide, wouldn't you say? When the number of Indians in Canada goes from a few tens of thousands to over 1 million. Strange. Doesn't genocide normally work in the other direction? Yes. Canada could have genocided its Indians if it wanted to. The very reason that Indian reserves were set up in Canada was to protect the Indians from being totally assimilated, which would have happened within probably 2 or 3 generations without Indian reserves. Speaking to reporters Friday afternoon, Winnipeg Police Chief Danny Smith said a man was arrested in relation to damage in a car and was not tied to the statue. He did not comment on if police tasered the man, which was reported by CBC News. Smith said the majority of the people at the demonstrations were peaceful, but some of our members were assaulted and spit on. Oh dear. He said some police cars were also damaged with rocks and paint. If you're not going to arrest people who are committing crimes in daylight in front of your very eyes, what is the point of you? What is the point? Because I'm not seeing one. Yeah. Oh, yes, I like this final paragraph. Meanwhile, at least 7 churches, mostly Catholic, have burned down in recent weeks. Lightning strikes, perhaps? Spontaneous combustion? Oh, and there is a coda to the story. Anyone experiencing distress or pain as a result of residential schools can call the Indian Residential School Survivors Society crisis line. It's available 24/7. Yes, people triggered by reading a story. Oh, yeah, this is too funny. Now, let's see. Let's go to what the Georgia Straight has to say. The Georgia Straight is edited by my old friend, my old colleague, Charlie Smith, who I worked with at CGOR back in the 1980s. Statue of Captain James Cook dumped into Victoria's Inner Harbor. He was the first English explorer to visit what is now the west coast of British Columbia. Why, thank you for that. A sculpture of one of the most famous colonial explorers, or you could just say explorers, full stop, no longer stands facing Victoria's Grand Empress Hotel. That's because some people decided to chuck the memorial to Captain James Cook into Inner Harbor. Ho, ho, ho. Very amusing. The bronze and granite statue was created by Derek and Patricia Freeborn. It was commissioned by the Victoria Environmental Enhancement Foundation and unveiled by former Premier Bill Bennett in 1976. Yes. And I want to find the story where the police chief of Winnipeg, where he talks about his disappointment. The Daily Mail has the story, of course. Canadian protesters rage, tear this bitch down, as they topple statues of the Queen and Queen Victoria in a harbor amid anger at deaths of nearly 1,000 Indigenous children found in mass graves. No children have been found in mass graves. But the media has memed itself into believing that this is true because they want it to be true. Let's see. In scenes reminiscent of the Black Lives Matter protests, where a hit list of racist statues was drawn up for destruction, after the murder of George Floyd, the bronze sculptures of Britain's current monarch and her great-great-grandmother were hauled down in Winnipeg, daubed with red paint, and even appeared to have been strangled with Mohawk flags. That's very amusing because the Mohawks live nowhere near Winnipeg. With no police to be seen anywhere, protesters in Orange, led by members of the left-wing anti-colonial Idle No More group, who are campaigning for Canada Day to be cancelled, tied ropes to the necks of the statues and ripped them to the ground to chants of no to genocide and bring her down, amid fury over the deaths of etc., etc., etc. The head of the Queen Victoria statue was later removed and thrown into the Assiniboine River. Okay. And, let's play the liberals are the real racists game. This is Kelly McParland in the National Post, turning a blind eye to Pierre Trudeau's unseemly Indigenous assimilation plan. Oh, I see. If they're separated, if you have an apartheid system, that's bad. But for them to become Canadians just like any other Canadians, that's bad too. There's almost exactly a century separating the governments of Sir John A. Macdonald and Pierre Trudeau, but not much difference in their approach to Indigenous issues. Trudeau's statement of the Government of Canada on Indian Policy 1969 didn't propose separating Indigenous children from their parents and isolated them in schools where they could be abused by nuns and priests, but the strategy was the same. The best way to handle the Indian problem was to get rid of the idea of being Indian in the first place. Better to turn them into regular old Canadians like the rest of us. As Trudeau saw it, assimilation as a strategy was far from dead. It just needed updating. The proposal, known as the 1969 White Paper, was launched by one of Trudeau's ambitious young cabinet up-and-comers, Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development, Jean Chrétien. It was a monumental disaster. You can date today's activism to the backlash generated by Trudeau and Chrétien. It makes educational reading for anyone wondering why so little progress was made between 1867 and 1969, or today for that matter, who thinks carting off a few statues and renaming some schools is a solution to anything. The Indians call themselves First Nations, but they are not nations. The Indians are not, with a handful of exceptions, they are not self-supporting. Each Indian in Canada gets about somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 in payments every year. There's also all the other gibs that they get: dental work, education, etc., etc., etc. What Trudeau proposed was that, the gibs were going to end. And, of course, the Indians didn't like that. This fool McPartland goes on, the view taken by Trudeau, he of the Just Society and later the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, was that equality meant everyone should be governed by the same laws. Wrong-o, Kelly. Read section 15 of the Charter, which expressly protects discrimination against white people. So no, it's not equality. Canada was no place for one set of rules for some people and another set for others. Wrong-o again. That concept might fit well enough with Trudeau's own ideas of Canada as a unified country of English and French. Trudeau brought in official multiculturalism in 1971 and made it clear there was no such thing as Canadian culture. There was no such thing as an ideal Canadian. He mocked the very idea of, Canadian boy or girl. How can you be so ignorant and be a columnist for a national newspaper? Yeah. We've talked about the decline in IQ, the dumbing of the population. And, okay, let's see, one more on this issue. Oh, yes, apparently someone having some fun with this story. Someone at the National Post, some editor, temperature rising. First Nations leaders condemn rash of church fires across Canada. Temperature rising, fire. Get it? Ho, ho, ho. Very amusing story. Would you not say? Oh, so very amusing. Let's go back to the chat. Okay. Clownvelt says, I'm still catching up on Charles Polanyi. Actually, it was Michael Polanyi, I believe. Queen Victoria was barely 5 feet tall, but she had such a grand spirit you wouldn't even know. I hope she haunts these vandals until they go insane, says Oscar Toe. You know, everywhere that the status of the minorities depends on the goodwill of the majority. And Canada's Indians and their allies, well, have strained the patience of everyone to the limit. Also, Idle No More is a fatuous name for an Indian protest group because it suggests that before this group, Indians were idle, which is a well-known insult about them. Dan says emotional labor knows no bounds. John Vance says, good Her Majesty doesn't represent the values she is supposed to hold up. I could care less of a statue being taken down. Yes, one of the news outlets interviewed some Indian woman blaming Queen Victoria for the residential schools. I guess they don't teach Canadian history in schools anymore, but the whole point of Dominion of Canada was that Canada had home rule. That is to say, its domestic policies were determined by Canadians and not by Britain. So Queen Victoria had nothing, nada to do with the residential schools. Kondiki Roulette says they sold equality for 50 years. We're all God's children. We all bleed red. Opportunities for all, etc. Now they said that was all a load of made up nonsense, but you have to believe the new nonsense. Statue vandalism is based but still illegal, says John Vance. Yes. Oscar Toe says, where's Chocokin 666? Don't tell me he's out grilling hot dogs. Great Lakes Nationalist says, affirmative right is Colin Liddell's spite site. He's creepy AF. Something very fed about him, like he's working as a hall monitor for Conservatism, Inc. Again, I'm not making that accusation. Interesting thing about Queen Victoria was that her very obvious mourning, excessive it was seen, for her late husband, Prince Albert, went on for so long that people were saying that the British people were so fed up with it that she might be the last monarch. But no, it didn't turn out that way. Thank you for your good wishes, Clownvelt. Don Willis says, not to stink up the celebration, will there be no KMG show Monday due to gallivanting this week? And no, there will be a show Monday, come what may. Brandon Smith says, not to mention exclusive access to jobs like Indian chief that can pay 7 figures. Also, here's another one. Everyone who works on an Indian reserve pays no taxes. Sounds pretty good, huh? What did you think about Richard Spencer debating Judas? I don't know what that is in reference to. I never really paid much attention to Richard Spencer, and I just had to laugh when he finally defined his, the idea that was going to mobilize Americans behind him: opposition to monotheism. Take that, Moses. Yeah, I can see that catching fire. Have you done anything special for your birthday? No. No. Ultra Testosterone says, do you respect Richard Spencer's knowledge and instincts? Richard Spencer thinks Christians are losers who worship a Jewish Jesus and want to make the West pagan again. Yes, I'm familiar with this argument. It's this sort of watered down Nietzscheanism. Winston Churchill believed in something very similar. I don't know. Was Cortez a wimp? Was Charles de Gaulle a wimp? Was Joan of Arc a wimp? I could go on. Frothing Fanboy says, I must say you were on fire today, and yesterday was pretty good too. I'm not surprised that the cops stood there examining the contents of their nasal passages. However, yes, Richard Spencer, he wants to go back to Greco-Roman pagan religion. Well, yes, after such knowledge, what forgiveness, as the saying goes. No, I don't really see that taking off. Oh, yes. Jim Bowden says Spencer was, as usual, being ambiguous. Spencer, Judas as a Jew, was in the natural element of confusing and lying. Oh, I get it. All right. Richard Spencer, does he still want to install himself as the Kaiser of a reconstituted Holy Roman Empire? Of course, with the holiness stripped from it. Okay. KMG, what do you think of Guillaume Fay? I'm not all that familiar with his work. And, okay, what's new? What's the latest from the Devil Mouse? This is from Gina Martinez at the Daily Mail. Disney World sparks backlash as it changes classic line greeting. Okay. Disney World has changed its classic ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls greeting used during one of its fireworks displays with one that says, "Good evening, dreamers of all ages." At a preview for the theme park's Happily Ever After fireworks display at the Orlando theme park Wednesday, cast members noticed the greeting had been changed. One cast member posted a video of the new greeting and said they preferred the original. They tweeted, "Disney removes ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls from Happily Ever After pre-show announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls forever," they tweeted. The classic greeting is voiced by Jack Wagner, known as the voice of Disney. And it is estimated that over the last 20 years, the park announcer for Disneyland, Disney World, and Tokyo Disneyland has uttered the phrase more than 8 million times. This is the latest politically correct move for Disney after it revamped some of its rides, including Splash Mountain and Jungle Cruises, after they were criticized for promoting racial and cultural stereotypes. The entertainment giant has also slapped warnings on Disney Plus shows like The Muppets, Dumbo, and Peter Pan for the same reason. Earlier this year, after reopening in Anaheim, the theme park was slammed by reviewers for its revamped Snow White ride because the prince kisses her while she is asleep and she's unable to give consent. Oh, yes. Yes, she would have been furious at being brought back to consciousness because no one sought my consent. You know, when someone has a heart attack or falls down, can't breathe, whatever, and someone rushes in to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, is there a question of consent there? Perhaps there is. Perhaps there is. Well, and if there isn't, there certainly should be. And in the Get Woke, Go Broke category, this is from Emily Siegel at NBC News. Tens of thousands of people who say they were sexually abused while scouts and filed suit against the Boy Scouts of America have reached an $850 million settlement, the largest in a child sexual abuse case in United States history. More than 84,000 people are part of the lawsuit against the 110-year-old organization, which has been plagued with claims of abuse from volunteers and leaders since the 1960s. The Boy Scouts of America filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy last year. Ken Rothweiler, an attorney, seriously, there's a lawyer named Ken Rothweiler, an attorney at Eisenberg Rothweiler in Philadelphia, represents the largest group of claimants, says that this settlement is a start. The insurance rights for the past 40 years will be put into a trust that the survivors group will control and could amount to billions more for the victims. Yes. So the Boy Scouts decided that they were going to allow homosexuals to be scoutmasters. What's the worst that could happen? Well, I guess they found out. Will any lessons be learned from this? Not likely. Not likely. And excellent piece by Leighton Woodhouse on his Substack called The Party Line. Feelings don't care about your facts. He begins, I don't know shit about science. The last time I took a natural science class was in undergrad to meet a distribution requirement. I took a couple classes in geology because I thought they'd be easy and got, I believe, a C and a B minus. They were the worst grades of my college career. I say this to assert emphatically and at the outset that I have zero qualifications to evaluate the most effective treatments for COVID-19. Not only do I lack any specialized knowledge of drugs and viruses, I don't even have the basic scientific competence to scan the methodology section of a research paper. Until now, my scientific ignorance hasn't been much of an obstacle. It has had no bearing on my professional career. Rarely have I felt the need in my daily life to dig up and review scientific papers. Whenever I've needed to form opinions on scientific questions, I've been content to read articles about them in newspapers I trust by science reporters I presume to be competent, professional, and sufficiently disinterested. All of that has changed. With the pandemic, suddenly science, or at least the science related to COVID-19, is as relevant to our immediate lives as the weather. We're not only expected to have at least vaguely informed opinions on questions related to virology, epidemiology, and vaccinology, but we'd be foolish not to, as our health literally depends on it. Yet at precisely that moment, mainstream journalists have made it nearly impossible to trust them as impartial investigators of those very questions. We have never needed specific, objective, factual information more than at the moment, when those who produce the news have made it their business to refuse on principle to seek it out. This has left us in a bizarre epistemological netherworld that is beginning to feel like a permanent condition in post-Trump America, whether the topic is science, politics, crime, policing, social stability, or anything with even a tangential relationship to the media's newfound activist agenda. We're entering a twilight zone of social fragmentation in our very perception of reality. And Woodhouse continues, I'm vaccinated. I got the Pfizer vaccine months ago. Like most people, I'd never heard of mRNA vaccines before this year. But I trusted they worked. I still trust they work because I'd been told so by highly credentialed people. I was aware that the vaccines had been approved by the FDA only under an emergency use authorization, so the standard for proof of efficacy had been lowered, but understood that clinical trials indicated they were extremely effective nonetheless. I knew that serious short-term side effects had been largely ruled out, even it was impossible to know whether there might be long-term side effects for a brand new technology. I was not particularly skeptical of any of this. Many intelligent, highly informed people took the precaution of waiting to get the vaccine until it was a practical necessity. I was not one of them. I got the vaccine as soon as I could and had no serious doubts about what I was doing. I considered myself adequately informed on the risks and the benefits, and I was sick of the lockdown. But if I had to do it all over again, I'm not entirely sure I would. That's not because anything particular in the world has changed. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a wave of vaccine casualties or a revelation of fabricated data in the clinical trials. There's no compelling reason that I'm aware of to believe the vaccines are any less effective or any more dangerous than we knew them to be before. There is, however, a great deal of reason to believe that the media outlets that have been interpreting the science and informing our judgment are utterly, almost maliciously unreliable. And if I can't trust the media's presentation of the facts and I can't trust myself to understand the science directly, then I'm left without much confidence in my own comprehension of the world at all. I listen pretty regularly, Woodhouse says, to Brett Weinstein's podcast, Dark Horse. Weinstein and his wife and co-host, Heather Heying, are evolutionary biologists. The two have long been interested in the I'm not going to mention this particular drug because I'll be banned from YouTube. To me, a scientific ignoramus, they and their guests make a persuasive case. I admire their probing, skeptical, systematic, rigorously logical approach to the topics they speak on. But again, I know nothing about science. With no scientific training, I have no way to meaningfully evaluate their claims. Normally, that's where journalists would come in. I look to responsible reporters who actually know how to read research papers, to listen to the arguments on each side, and tell me in a language I can understand what their merits and shortcomings are. But what is the record of journalists tasked with interpreting the science of COVID-19? Or, to be even more specific, what is the record of journalists tasked with assessing Brett Weinstein's scientific hypotheses on questions related to COVID-19? A year ago, Weinstein was one of the few professional scientists in the world willing to question the World Health Organization's summary dismissal of the hypothesis that COVID-19 originated in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the product of experiments aimed at making bat coronaviruses more transmissible and deadly to human beings. For that, he was ridiculed. Last June, Weinstein was a guest on the Joe Rogan Experience, where he described the lab leak hypothesis. After Rogan referenced that interview in a later episode, Media Matters for America derided him in a post headlined, "Joe Rogan spreads unfounded conspiracy theory that COVID-19 started in a lab." After Weinstein and Heying appeared on Bill Maher's show to discuss the hypothesis, the Daily Beast dunked on them for pushing a, quote, bonkers Steve Bannon Wuhan lab leak conspiracy theory, unquote. The couple were dismissed as a pair of culture war-obsessed podcast hosts who were biology professors and are not epidemiologists or virologists by someone who writes TV recaps for a living. Today, Weinstein and Heying have been largely vindicated. Anthony Fauci has walked back his prior rejection of the hypothesis. President Biden has ordered U.S. intelligence agencies to investigate it. Media outlets, including the Daily Beast, have gone back and scrubbed their own headlines to reflect a new consensus that it is entirely plausible that COVID was spawned in the Wuhan lab. And yet Weinstein and Heying are again being branded conspiracists, this time for their belief in something I cannot mention here. This time, though, they're not just being called names, they're being censored by YouTube. While I have no scientific background, I do have a solid basis for judging the position of those who have sought to disparage them. That's because doing so requires no knowledge of science, and science is not the means with which they have attempted to win the debate. They have chosen another tool instead, silencing by decree. YouTube's misinformation policy on COVID-19 prohibits medical misinformation that contradicts local health authorities or the World Health Organization's medical information about COVID-19. To most people, this might appear eminently reasonable, since most people don't think too much about how science works. But in fact, YouTube may as well be deferring to the scriptures. Despite its illustrious name, the WHO's authority on what constitutes scientific fact is as arbitrary as that of any governing agency. As a scientific bureaucracy, the WHO may represent the default consensus of the medical and scientific establishment at any given time, but to assume ipso facto that the medical and scientific establishment is correct in its conclusions about scientific questions that are brand new to us is to reject the very nature of a scientific method. To be fair to YouTube, its posture toward official scientific truth is hardly unique. It reflects that of the media establishment, which throughout the pandemic has bowed to the authority of the WHO, the CDC, the NIH, and Anthony Fauci practically by reflex, in a manner reminiscent of the jingoistic post-9/11 years. Scientific orthodoxy is hardly the only dogma the media has embraced, and their mission to restrict the public to a diet of information they regard as best for our health. Journalists have sought to determine for the rest of us what is and what is not permissible to believe about all kinds of topics, including gender, racism, crime and policing, standardized testing, and a complete stranger's interpersonal experiences. It doesn't seem too far-fetched to imagine a day when YouTube starts pulling down videos for contradicting official sources on questions related to basically any topic that draws the right amount of political attention. Yes, he speaks of a feeling that's becoming alarmingly familiar, whether the topic is COVID treatments, the function of police, the ambiguities of gender dysphoria in children, or the allegedly racist or homophobic motivations of mass shootings. As a question enters the public discourse, myriad outlets spontaneously converge on a single common interpretation. Contradictory views are sanded down to a uniform texture, and dissidents begin to regard it with contempt or pity. Open inquiry, even intellectual curiosity, is shunned as thinly veiled bigotry. A regime of acceptable opinion forms and orthodoxy coheres. And Woodhouse concludes, what emerges from this process is not moral clarity, but a collective charade of agreement performed by people too timid to express their private doubts. It's a sort of Potemkin village that we're all forced to live in. As individuals, we're left stranded. We don't quite buy the performance we're all compelled to participate in, but we wonder whether the alternative explanations are what they are accused of being, delusions cooked up by conspiracy nuts. Down one path lies madness, down the other the same. It's a free society. Choose one. And it would appear that in some jurisdictions in North America, school teachers are close to achieving the ultimate goal of the teacher, which is to be on vacation 12 months a year and still be paid. This is from Rory Cooper at National Review. The children may be on summer vacation, but the teachers' union haven't taken a break from trying to harm them. This week, the National Education Association is holding its annual meeting. Members are debating and adopting many new policies, from anti-Israel statements to funding campaigns against their growing number of critics. But one new business item should alarm all parents. New business item 33 reads, the NEA will call for mandatory, safe, and effective COVID-19 vaccinations and testing for all students and staff before returning to face-to-face instruction in the fall, subject to medical exceptions in accordance with existing law, and will widely publicize this position via social media. We will further call for and publicize that safety measures such as social distancing, masking, and proper ventilation be mandatory for all. The NEA, like its counterpart, the American Federation of Teachers, is laying the groundwork for schools to remain closed in the fall, at least for them to have draconian and unnecessary rules in place to make schools inhospitable to children or learning. How about they just all get fired if they don't return to work? You know, school teaching is not a science. Yes, I know people get bachelors of education degree, but God knows what they're doing there for all this time. I knew a fellow who was getting a bachelor's of education from the University of Alberta, and I saw him with a book. It was one of the standard memoirs of the Holocaust. And I said, what's that for? He said, it's my education class. And I thought, well, I'm sorry, I don't understand. What does the Holocaust have to do with teaching elementary school students? No. Anyone of reasonable intelligence can be a teacher, and an enormous amount of money could be saved if the teaching monopoly were broken. And it used to be, it becomes again as it was, that any reasonable person can be a teacher. I mean, teachers in English don't have to know anything about English. In history, they don't have to know anything about history. It's all in the study guides. It would be useful for teachers, teaching English to know about English, teaching history to know about history, etc., etc. I mean, that's the ideal, but that would violate some sort of professional ethics, I suppose. And oh, no. What's happening with the Delta variant? The Delta variant's not going to let us down, is it? According to Axios, COVID-19 dropped to the 7th leading cause of death in the U.S. in June, a marked decline from January 2021, when it was number 1, new Kaiser Family Foundation data shows. Why it matters. Thank you for being patronizing, Axios. COVID-19 is still wreaking major havoc in the U.S., especially among people who aren't vaccinated. On the other hand, we've come a long way. Let's hope the progress continues. This is a news story? This is from Rob Crilly at the Daily Mail. President Biden admitted that more lives will be lost to the Delta variant of COVID-19, even as he encouraged Americans to enjoy their 4th of July holiday weekend. Delivering an optimistic message at the White House on positive job numbers, he struck an uneasy balance as he warned of more COVID deaths ahead, but played down worries that the Delta variant would turn back the clock to the worst days of the pandemic. Worries or hopes? Yes. You remember when Joe Biden said that if Americans were good little boys and girls, that he'd allow them to have 4th of July barbecues? You know, in moderation, of course. Did he actually ever give that approval? It's not his approval to give, you understand. And some troubling news about our youth, the kiddies. This is from Tyler Durden at Zero Hedge. If one defines a failed state as one where the most productive segment of society does nothing, then America is 20% of the way there. According to a new report for the Center for Economic Policy and Research, 18.3%, or almost 1 in 5 young adults in the U.S., were neither working nor studying in the first quarter, as Black and Hispanic youth remained idle at disproportionate. Specifically, some 3.8 million Americans aged 20 to 24 were not in employment, education, or training, known as the NEET rate, in the first 3 months of the year. That's a whopping 24%, or 740,000 from higher than a year earlier, before many lost their jobs or opted to defer college enrollment as campuses shut down at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Bloomberg notes that while the NEET rate has eased from its April 2020 peak, progress on reducing racial disparities hasn't been as even. Almost a quarter of Black young adults were inactive last quarter, up from a 20.9% in the same period of 2020. The rate for Hispanics in that age group was just under 20% and about 16% for white Americans. As usual, Asians somehow always find ways to be the busiest of all, despite widespread excuses for failure as systemic racism and white rage, as the Asian NEET rate in the United States at 10.4%. Needless to say, inactive youth is a worrying sign for the future of the economy, as they don't gain critical job skills to help realize their future earning potential. High NEET rates also foster environments that are fertile for social unrest, although since no politician will ever recognize the mind-blowing Chicago gun violence, we may as well just ignore this. And let's go to lockdown skeptics. Councils in virus hotspots ignoring national guidelines on not giving children COVID vaccines. See, this is really weird, because how is it possible that in one country, government agencies can say no, people under this age should not be given vaccines, whereas if you say this in Canada and the United States, you're in very serious trouble. As we saw, a doctor and professor was fired from the University of Saskatchewan for saying just this. Very, very strange. Shouldn't the science be uniform across the globe? Around 1 in 7 older British teenagers hesitant over getting COVID vaccine, according to new research. Australia agrees plan to abandon zero COVID strategy. Finally, some sanity from Australia. National Cabinet has agreed to a 4-stage plan that would see Australia transform into a vaccinated nation that manages COVID-19 with few restrictions. The goal, as Prime Minister Scott Morrison said, is for Australia to begin treating COVID-19 like the flu. So did they get some really bad polling numbers in Australia? Where was the phrase tarred and feathered used a lot about Mr. Morrison and the other leading Australian politicians? The country's vaccine program has not exactly got off to a good start. Australia still has a very low single-digit vaccination rate. Moreover, the country currently relies on AstraZeneca, which achieves only a 60% protection rate against symptomatic infection with the Indian variant, and which will be phased out due to several fatal and severe reactions in young adults. Thus, Australia is likely to face a fierce uphill battle against the coronavirus during the ongoing winter season. Asda, which is a supermarket chain in Britain, moved towards hybrid working for office staff. New York Times article lays out circumstantial evidence for lab leak theory. Millions of Brits excluded from new EU vaccine passport scheme. And before we go to Alex Berenson's Twitter feed, he has a free article on Substack, Why COVID is Like AIDS. Hint, not because the risks are similar. The political story of AIDS is tricky, he says. Scientists realized quickly that gay men and intravenous drug users were at far higher risk of contracting HIV than the general public. But they feared people might not support funding for AIDS research and stigmatize those groups further if they explained that reality openly. So they didn't. As Smithsonian Magazine reported in 2013, federally funded campaigns sought to address a large number of people from all backgrounds, male, female, homosexual, or heterosexual. The America Responds to AIDS campaign, created by the CDC, ran from 1987 to 1996 and became a central part of the everyone is at risk message. The deception probably increased the public's willingness to fund research, but it came with serious side effects. Smithsonian went on to explain, some AIDS organizations, especially those providing service to communities at the highest risk for contracting AIDS, saw the campaign as diverting money and attention away from the communities that needed it most. It also caused needless fear in people at vanishingly low risk, especially heterosexual women. Perhaps most important, it was fundamentally untrue. That fact should matter to anyone who believes truth, even unpleasant truth, ought to drive public policy decisions, which brings us to COVID. SARS-CoV-2 isn't even in the same time zone as HIV as a killer, but it is like HIV in one crucial way. It plays favorites. After a year, most of us know that the elderly are at much higher risk from coronavirus, though even well-informed people may not be aware how much higher the risk is. But what public health authorities have gone out of the way to obscure is how much obesity, especially severe obesity, drives the risk of the coronavirus in younger people. In April, British researchers published a definitive paper on the subject in the Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology, a peer-reviewed journal. The researchers examined the medical records of almost 7 million people in England to look at the link between obesity and severe outcomes from COVID, including hospitalization and death. The top-line findings show only a moderate link between extra weight and COVID risk. But when the researchers looked more closely, they found that's because in older people, being overweight does not drive excess risk. So the researchers divided the patients into 4 age ranges, 20 to 39, 40 to 59, 60 to 79, and over 80. They found that in the 2 younger groups, including adults up to age 60, being obese was associated with nearly all the risk that COVID would lead to intensive care or death. The findings held even after they adjusted for many different potential confounding factors like smoking, non-weight-related illnesses, and wealth. The excess risk was extremely high even for people who weren't morbidly obese, defined as a body mass index of 40 or more. A person between 40 and 60 with a BMI of 35, someone who was 5'8" and 230 pounds, had about 5 times the risk of dying of COVID of a person of normal weight. For younger adults, the excess risk was even higher, and for morbidly obese people, even higher still. In contrast, people of normal weight under 40 are at essentially no risk of death from COVID. The researchers found their rate to be 1 in 10,000 per year. Even in the 40 to 59 age range, normal weight adults had an annual risk well in under 1 in 1,000. You know, as Johnny Rotten famously said at the last Sex Pistols concert, ever get the feeling you've been cheated? And moving on to, let's go to Berenson here. Give me a second. Here we go. And there he is. Okay. Let's see. Oh, New York staffer resigns after falsely accusing ICE agent of having Nazi tattoo. Why, that would be our old friend Talia Lavin, wouldn't it? And here's a story from The Cut. Ooh, physiognomy is real. When New Yorker fact checker Talia Lavin posted a series of photos on Twitter mistakenly implying that an immigration and customs enforcement agent had a Nazi tattoo, she was quickly informed of her error. So she deleted her tweet and explained why in a follow-up. Within a week, she found herself resigning from her job. I just feel like I made a small mistake and it's destroyed my life, Lavin told The Cut today. She first posted her tweet in the early morning hours of Monday, June the 18th, and her follow-up came shortly after. Yes, it turned out that this disabled veteran had a Maltese cross. She had confused it with an iron cross, but in any event, the iron cross is not a Nazi symbol. Its use predated the Nazi regime in Germany by many decades. But I guess all crosses are the same to people like that. Let's go to Jim Kunstler's column today, which is called Stumbling Toward Reality. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who answers to the title The Science in certain circles, said this week that there were going to be two Americas, the vaxxed and the unvaxxed. Earth to Dr. Fauci, we are already two Americas, the reality on board and the reality optional. One reality is that vaccines developed at warp speed appear to have gnarly side effects that can outweigh the risk of the disease they're engineered to protect against. Another reality is that the Delta variant of SARS-CoV-19 is more contagious but also weaker, less likely to result in hospitalization among the unvaxxed. Yet another reality is that the Delta variant also infects the fully vaccinated. Oh, what to do? Consider not allowing yourself to be jerked around by U.S. health officials who have trouble keeping their story straight. For instance, Dr. Anthony Fauci, aka The Science, who, records show, apparently assisted the biowarfare division of the China's People's Liberation Army at the Wuhan lab in the development of a world-beating gain-of-function bat virus, which halfway through year 2 of its run seems to be following the usual trajectory of viral epidemics by growing weaker before it disappears altogether. And then we'll see what happens longer term among the vaxxed, who are subjected to flurries of toxic spike proteins. It's the opinion of some, though not myself, that the COVID-19 episode was unleashed upon the world to allow the elite to execute a controlled demolition of the global economy so as to quash climate change by reducing carbon emissions, and therefore ensure a brighter future for said elite, while cruelly throwing the rest of the world's population overboard. Oh, I don't know. Klaus Schwab and his minions of the Great Reset seem more like hapless control freaks than people actually able to control anything, least of all the whole world. Dr. Fauci's role looks like a species of generic egomania with a top hat of greed, considering his financial interests in vaccines. The reality is that the global economy, such as its high-tech industrial economy, is shooting its own wad very nicely without a whole lot of assistance from alleged nefarious parties. Meanwhile, Kunstler continues, the 4th of July is upon us and the nation is not quite half vaxxed up. And yet we are about to celebrate the meaning of Independence Day, which is freedom from getting jerked around by tyrants. The idea. And so you see, the USA also seems to be divided between those who take liberty and its associated values to heart and those who seek to coerce, dominate, censor, cancel, and punish those who show signs of wishing to enjoy liberty in the pursuit of happiness. Since the mythic figure known as Trump appears to represent the group that favors liberty, it has been necessary for the latter group of woke tyrants to find some way to punish him. And so, after much sedulous digging and rooting through every record vaulted in the Earth's mantle, the Manhattan District's Attorney's Office, conducting an investigation alongside the New York Attorney General, has lodged a 15-count indictment against the Trump Organization and its CFO, a Mr. Alan Weisselberg, for a conspiracy to commit criminal tax fraud, falsifying business records, and omitting to pay taxes on employees' indirect compensation, i.e. fringe benefits, amounting to $1.7 million over 15 years. Cue Dr. Evil with pinky finger inserted in corner of mouth. 1.7 million over 15 years equals about $113,000 a year. The New York State tax upon which might be in the neighborhood of $10,000. That is on the fringe benefits of company cars, parking spaces, and college tuition for company employees. Now, there is a powerful case for malfeasance. Do you know what 1.7 million will get you? I'll tell you. The raised ranch house that my parents bought in the Long Island suburbs for about $20,000 in 1954. Note, rather severely updated since then. Just saying. Notice that the complaint against the Trump org was not brought by the state tax authorities. Why not? Perhaps because it is beneath the dignity of even calling it a Mickey Mouse case. Instead, this is the sum total of what Democratic Party lawfare ferrets could dig up in 5 years, including 2 years and $33 million spent by Robert Mueller's investigators, plus the extra exertions of the DOJ's Southern District federal attorneys. Well done, lawfare warriors. It will be fun to watch the prosecution of this case if it isn't preemptorily laughed out of court. It was especially rich to see the way the New York Times played the story in Friday's morning edition, a giant banner headline, taken down, by the way, sometime after 9 a.m. EDT, but we screen capped it just prior. Finally, in this trifecta of clanging unrealities, the Democratic Party efforts to promote endless widespread election fraud were dealt a knockout blow Thursday in the U.S. Supreme Court's decision upholding a new Arizona election reform law that prohibits ballot harvesting and voting out of one's own election district. The Scottish decision kind of moots the DOJ's more recent hustle to undermine Georgia's new election reform law, which includes similar prohibitions against ballot shenanigans. Kunstler concludes, in short, states can now take responsible steps to ensure fair elections, a hard concept to grasp, I'm sure, but there it is. Now let's see how many states seek to unravel previous election shenanigans. For instance, what went down in November. Happy July 4th, everyone. Don't hurt anyone or yourselves. Yes, Berenson said of Talia Lavin that he is lucky in his choice of enemies. And indeed he is. Berenson has sought from the very beginning to find out the truth about COVID-19, the disease, and vaccines. And for this, he has been endlessly pilloried because we know the truth. Where does the truth come from? It has been stated by authorities. Well, that's good enough for me. We can just stop examining these questions because the word from authority has come down. Let's go to the chat. Jim Bowden asks, what is the best state to visit in America? I don't know. Washington State has a lot there. I mean, it's got, Seattle, and north of Seattle is a very beautiful country. And of course, there's many different regions in Washington State, the semi-desert region to the east of the state. I spent a lot of time in Washington State. Of course, now that Seattle has been turned into a hellhole with mentally ill people scaring away everyone from Pioneer Square and the like, I don't know that I would choose to go there anymore. Yo Mama says Alaska. Don Willis says Texas and any other. Visionary Companion says somehow peasants setting up altars to Santa Muerte was not what I was thinking of when I was thinking about Catholicism in college. Okay, excluding the Bronx and Compton, which were recommended by my American friend as a joke. Oh, yes. Okay. Basically added satanic pagan elements to Catholicism, says Ultra Testosterone. When Breaking Bad was on TV, and the elite were watching Breaking Bad, and all that stuff about the Mexican drug gangs and their incredible brutality, and, oh, yes, with extra added devil worship, I kind of thought, it shows you how naive I am, that people would watch this and think, yeah, maybe we should make a better effort to secure the border. and keep, Mexican gang members out of America. But no, as we found out, that this was what Trump was in favor of. So therefore, that was a terrible idea. And of course, Trump's a racist, worse than Hitler, as Sarah Silverman informed us. But of course, you've been reading about wages going up in the United States. Well, with the borders wide open, you can kiss those wage gains goodbye. Yo Mama says Talia Lavin is a LOL cow. No ex-KMG crossover when, says Yo Mama. No? Who is this no? News flash, obesity contributes to ill health, says Star Rover. Well, healthy at any size, right? Who's that woman who plays the flute, who was always stripping herself nearly naked? Stop doing that, please, large lady. Okay. Trust the science, says Jim Bowden. Okay. Thank you, Visionary Companion, for your greeting. Dionysius says going after teachers is worse than going after cops. Well, if they won't do their jobs, everyone has to be vaccinated and plus masks and distancing. What the two teachers' unions are saying is that we do not intend to work, but we expect to get paid for it nonetheless. Dionysus says, we got our college degree in the subject matter. For example, my degree is in chemistry. Read teachers' unions. Have you read Peter Brimlow's book, The Worm in the Apple? Ask My Trail of Disgrace. Long time ago. A long time ago. Teachers are modern-day childminders, says Jim Bowden. KMG, Dionysus began, I am a teacher. No, we don't get degrees in education. Well, I was talking about my own country, where a bachelor's degree. Of course, then some people get master's degrees in education, or EdDs, like a Dr. Jill Biden. Men Without Hats, one-hit wonder. Actually, they had 2 hits. Pop Goes the World was a hit as well. Don Willis, you can vax if you want to. You can leave the right behind, because if your right friends don't vax, then they're no friends of mine. I like that. That is quite a good. Jim Bowden says Sydney is in a lockdown. There are 150 with COVID, 3 in hospital, no deaths, and no one on respirator. Go and figure why there is a lockdown. Yes, as I was saying yesterday, there have been 2 deaths in the whole of Australia in 2021 attributed to COVID-19. One of them was some 80-year-old who apparently picked it up in the Philippines. And another one was a man who died of pneumonia 8 months after being diagnosed with COVID. Yeah, 2 deaths. 2 deaths. Okay, it amazes me, says Contracoup, how health authorities seem completely unaware how the shrill tone of the media's push for mRNA vaccination builds mistrust. Safe, effective treatment don't need threats or lotteries. No, they don't. What was the latest? Giving Xboxes to young people? Doesn't an Xbox cost a few $100s? Seems rather disproportionate. Okay. It is, of course, 4th of July weekend. Happy Independence Day to my American friends and to all friends of America. President Joe Biden on Friday cut off reporters who questioned him about the U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, saying he wanted to focus on the upcoming 4th of July holiday and happy things. I want to talk about happy things, man. He told reporters who asked him about the American troops who left Bagram Air Base after almost 2 decades of war. Yes, White House press secretary not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki, later accused reporters of reading too much into the president's snappy responses, arguing he wanted to focus on the upcoming Independence Day celebrations. And she grew defensive when pressed on the issue. Why doesn't she just tell the truth? That Joe Biden is a senile man. He has advanced Alzheimer's, and he was sundowning. And he didn't want any sass from those young pups, or whatever, slang from the 1940s that Biden would use. Okay, and here's a story from the Washington Times. Stephen Dinan. The U.S. economy will roar to life for the rest of the year and remain supercharged through 2022, the Congressional Budget Office said Thursday, although the analysts also warned Americans to expect inflation to rise sharply for several months. Americans who saved up during the pandemic are looking to spend, creating strong demand for goods and services. Inventories aren't ready to handle that demand right now, thus the spike in inflation. Are they kidding me? Apparently, the creation out of thin air of trillions of new dollars has nothing to do with runaway inflation. We had this argument in the 1970s and the 1980s, and it was decided that the money supply was the key to controlling inflation. But, that was a long time ago. Who remembers that? So an article on AmericanMind.org by Joel Kotkin. And Kotkin is the author of The Coming of Neo-Feudalism, which I reviewed on the book club a few months ago, which I highly recommend. The article is called Fully Oligarchic Luxury Californication. What happens in California matters well beyond its borders. The Golden State's cultural and technological influence on America and the world now could provide the nation's next political template. What California is creating can be best described as oligarchic socialism, a form of collectivism that combines hierarchy with equity, regulation with oligopoly, and progressive intentions with feudal results. Like so much else, the pandemic has accelerated this trend, vastly enriching the tech elite, while turning much of the working and middle class dependent on what Marx called the proletarian alms bag. In contemporary California, traditional notions of economic development and upward mobility have been replaced by subsidized housing, a state bailout for renters, in default emergency aid to small businesses, and enhanced employment payments. Once all the state's new commitments are met, California's much ballyhooed $75 billion surplus, Chapman economist Jim Doty estimates, shrinks to a still considerable $25 billion. With such a rich surplus, other states would consider either spending the extra cash, as Texas and other states do, on economic development, either through tax cuts, regulatory holidays, or incentives. But work and upward mobility for the middle and working classes are no longer a prime concern in the Golden State. Michael Bernick, former director of the state's Employment Development Department, says, the culture for much of California, driven by state politics, is one of benefits and now guaranteed income, not as job strategy or expectation. Bernick notes that this approach, as opposed to boosting employment, is also popular with both the tech oligarchs and bureaucrats who together dominate the state. The synergy between Silicon Valley wealth and the expansive welfare state is clear. With seemingly unlimited capital gains and income receipts, the state can fund ever more dysfunctional schools at a high level, pay enormous pensions, and generally expand the role of a state government. This face in government seems odd given its record of incompetence, from the high-speed rail fiasco to forcing a bailout of the marijuana industry. They had that same problem in the province of Ontario. How do you lose money selling marijuana? Well, I guess you'd have to ask the folks running Ontario and California. The state has also mishandled unemployment claims, according to the LA Times, with more than 1 million Californians awaiting unemployment checks that were delayed or frozen. Worse yet, the state last year gave payments of $11 billion to various scammers, including people in jail and criminals from Nigeria and Russia. Politics, not competence, notes Lucy Dunn, head of the Orange County Business Council, plays the leading role here, particularly with Governor Newsom's recall. His budget seems more focused on the welfare state with an eye towards surviving recall and preparing for elections in 2022, she observes. Business organizations throughout the state have begged him to stop making it easier for folks to stay on the dole and get back to work. Ideologues hail the state as the ultimate avatar of a green capitalism that we can believe in. Some, such as a writer at Bloomberg, claim the state has the best economy in the world, pointing to the bloated stock prices of the major tech firms, and the enormous growth of wealth of a relative handful. Yet, in reality, the best economy has not shown much resiliency in the pandemic. Overall, the wealthiest California did somewhat better than the national average, but low-income earners did considerably worse. The state now suffers the nation's 48th highest unemployment rate, and its rate of job recovery places it firmly in the bottom third of the states. Last year, Los Angeles, whose city council is more concerned with climate change than economic torpor, suffered the highest unemployment rate of the nation's top 10 metro areas, higher even than New York. These trends reflect an economic and policy mindset injurious to most Californians, yet it conforms with the rejection among the oligarchs of broad-based economic growth, particularly given the challenges of climate change and the imperative to reduce the commoners' use of carbon-based energy. Greg Ferenstein, who interviewed 147 digital company founders, says most believe that an increasingly greater share of economic wealth will be generated by a smaller slice of very talented or original people. Everyone else will increasingly subsist on some combination of part-time entrepreneurial gig work and government aid. To be sure, our new economic overlords are not typical rapacious anti-tax billionaires in the traditional mode. They instead see government spending as a useful tool to keep the populist pitchforks away. Numerous oligarchs, Mark Zuckerberg, Pierre Omidyar, Elon Musk, and Sam Altman, founder of the Y Combinator, have embraced this vision, including a guaranteed wage, usually $500 or $1,000 monthly. This marks a departure from the old social democratic notion that the state should create conditions that allow families to enjoy upward mobility and ever greater independence. It's a break as well from the California model developed by Pat Brown, California governor from 1958 to 66, who built the state's expansive road network, public university, and college system and promoted the development of well-paying jobs in fields such as aerospace. Whereas Pat Brown built the freeways and encouraged the growth of new communities, his son and his son's less thoughtful successor have seemed intent on squashing the dreams of all but a handful of Californians. Once the exemplar of upward mobility, California has the fourth highest Gini inequality index in the nation, behind New York, Connecticut, and Louisiana, and experienced the fifth largest expansion of inequality since 2010. Amid the unfathomable wealth of the oligarchs, it suffers the country's highest rates of cost of living adjusted poverty, the worst housing unaffordability in the continental U.S., and a devastating shortage of mid-skilled jobs. African Americans and Latinos do far worse in terms of income and home ownership in Los Angeles or the Bay Area, the latter of which has become among the most segregated places in the country. Yes, again, this is from AmericanMind.org and an essay by Joel Kotkin, who concludes, if the money train crashes or even slows, ultimately someone, perhaps from the center-right or more likely the further left, could challenge the status quo. Newsom, with his massive transfer payments and weak opposition, will likely survive the ill-prepared recall with ease, but poll data suggests considerable underlying dissatisfaction. Roughly half of California residents, according to a 2019 UC Berkeley poll, have considered leaving the state. Between 2014 and 2020, net domestic outmigration from California grew from 46,000 to 242,000, according to the U.S. Census Bureau estimates. In Los Angeles, according to a USC survey, 10% plan to move out this year. Ultimately, if disenchantment grows and the state faces renewed fiscal pressures, things may turn out detrimental to the oligarchs themselves. Having consented to even push for a feudalized society, they may find that the serfs can also rebel, seeking to confiscate their wealth to create fully automated luxury communism that promises hoi polloi places on Easy Street. Once property and wealth concentrates to the extreme, even the most powerful figures could face expropriation or worse, much like the glib French and Russian aristocrats of centuries past. I will be moving to the book club soon. More on Naomi Osaka, who is she's part of a rising group in sports kind of critical mass building there, that she is acclaimed for not playing her sport. I wonder how many others there will be. We got Kaepernick as number one, and then her. And I guess we have what? That female hammer thrower who's going to claim that she was, forced out by chauvinistic Americans. Or perhaps that other athlete, a sprinter, who was caught with THC in her system. Maybe she could claim that, bigots drove her out. And she could get Nike to give her lots of money. This is from Ryan Gatos at Fox News. Tennis legend Boris Becker had some tough words for Naomi Osaka at the start of Wimbledon last week after she announced she would skip the tournament. If you can't deal with the media, it's very difficult to be a professional tennis player, Becker told the London Times. Osaka raised eyebrows when she declined to speak with the media at the French Open. She eventually withdrew after being threatened with default and fines. She then announced she would take a break from the spotlight and later committed to focusing on the Olympics, where she would represent Japan. Becker predicted in an interview with the Times she would have a tough time if she can't face the media pressure. Is that really pressure, he asked? Isn't it pressure when you don't have food on the table, when you've got to feed your family and you don't have a job, when you have a life-changing injury? Isn't that more pressure? You're 23, you're healthy, you're wealthy, your family is good. Where's the effing pressure? Those are good questions from Boris Becker. And, okay. You know what a sideline reporter is, right? It's a person, almost always a woman now for some reason, who walks up to some coach or some athletes going into the locker or coming out and asks them inane questions. So how much is that job worth? Well, let's find out. This is from Andrew Marchand at the New York Post. At one point in negotiations with NBA Finals host and college football national championship sideline reporter Maria Taylor, ESPN offered her a raise from her current salary of nearly $1 million per year that would eventually reach almost $5 million, according to sources. Taylor turned it down. Taylor, sources said, was hoping to be in the Stephen A. Smith money neighborhood, which is near $8 million annually. Okay. Again, nice work if you can get it. Okay, and I'm looking at a picture of Megan Thee Stallion, and despite her name, Megan appears to be a woman. Who chose that name, by the way? Did no one point out to her what a stallion is? This is from Ruth Samuel at the Los Angeles Times. Whenever Megan Thee Stallion releases a new song, the floodgates of TikTok open. From Crybaby to Savage, the social media app runs rife with multi-step dances, complex challenges, and various remixes. That is, until Black creators decide to stop making them. Normally, once a Megan song comes out, there's a dance that night, a dance within the hour. TikToker Challen Trishan, who prefers to go by Challen T, 22, recently told the Times. But I was noticing that there's no dance for Stallion's latest song. I was scrolling and noticing that everyone was flailing their arms under the sound, she added, referring to how TikTok users can find countless videos that feature and use the same audio or music by clicking on the spinning record in the bottom right corner of a video. So why no songs? As the moves became increasingly widespread and usurped by white faces, boo, their origins fade into oblivion. While white influencers such as Addison Rae make late-night television show appearances, break records, and profit from reality series deals, Black creators are left behind to beg for credit. Tired of constant cultural and intellectual theft, Black creators on TikTok have been on strike since Juneteenth. If you asked anyone like 5 years ago, I'm going to read you a sentence and you tell me what this means. Tired of constant cultural and intellectual theft, Black creators on TikTok have been on strike since Juneteenth, refraining from making a dance to Megan Thee Stallion's latest single, Thought Shit. Okay. Yes, oppression ain't what it used to be. And I would have thought that being a U.S. Supreme Court judge, or a Supreme Court judge anywhere, well, particularly in the United States, because there's no mandatory retirement age. I mean, you're golden. You're bulletproof. You can make any decision you want. You can say whatever you want to say, and nobody can do anything to you. I'm trying to think of the first black member of the U.S. Supreme Court. He was the lawyer in Brown versus Board of Education. I'm sure it will come to me. Apparently, he was so gaga in his final years on the court that he just sat on a couch watching his stories, his soap operas. Well, all of the work was done by clerks. And what are you going to do? What are you going to do? But this is from Reuters. Conservatives slam Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett for siding with liberals and declining to hear appeal of Southern Baptist florist who refused to sell flowers to a gay couple for their wedding. Baronel Stutzman refused flowers to Robert Ingersoll and Kurt Fried in 2013. Southern Baptists believe that marriage should be between a man and woman. On Friday, the Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal in the case. 3 conservative justices said they wanted to hear it, but conservatives condemned Trump appointees Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett for failing to take it up. Result keeps Washington state ruling that she discriminated against the couple. Well, yes, I suppose the message was put to Kavanaugh and Barrett that, you're on watch. You better be very careful. But again, both of them are in a position to say, shut up. I can do whatever I like, and there's nothing you can do about it. Oh, and I have this job for life, and if I want to, I can live as long as Ruth Bader Ginsburg. How would you like that? But no, it would seem that they are cowards. So let's move to the book club. And our book today, appropriately enough, since yesterday was Canada Day or Cancel Day or whatever they're calling it now. It's a short history of Canada, the 7th edition by Desmond Morton. And I will tell you that I find this book, it's well written, it's consistently entertaining, and informative. I'd like to begin by reading what he says in the preface, which is it's very relevant to what's happening in my country now. A nation, said the French philosopher Ernest Renan, is a people that has done great things together in the past. It is not bound by language or by a common culture, but by a shared experience. History is what Canadians have in common. Many Canadians believe that their history is short, boring, and irrelevant. They are wrong on all counts. The choices Canadians can make today have been shaped by history. The governors of New France launched arguments that federalists and sovereigntists repeat in present-day Quebec. Were the natives who far outnumbered them sovereign allies or enemies, or were they the subjects of the French king? That debate began early. Early fur traders illustrated economic laws that modern-day resource development unconsciously follows. Canadians trying to understand the challenges of political leadership would do well to take a second look at the arts of Sir John A. Macdonald and William Lyon Mackenzie King. In each generation, Canadians have had to learn how to live with each other in this big, rich land. It has never been easy. If we ignore history, we make it doubly difficult. This book has been written to make it a little easier for Canadians to know and understand their country. It is concerned with politics and economics, as well as how Canadians have lived their own lives, because our greatest problems and achievements have come through the entwining of our lives with a community. What Desmond Morton says here about how Canadian history is regarded is absolutely true. I read an awful lot of history and biography when I was a boy, but I had picked this up from reading newspapers and watching television, that Canadian history, that is so boring. Why would anyone be interested in Canadian history? So I thought, okay, I won't waste any time on Canadian history. But I was a boy, and boys need heroes. And I thought, where might I find heroes? And then, America seems to have a lot of heroes. And, if people ask me, why do you seem so interested in America? Well, it was kind of a matter of necessity, because the elite of my own country told me that my country's history was not worth thinking about. Later, of course, Canada's elite pivoted to the position that Canada's history is not boring anymore. It is an endless tale of wickedness. How about that? How about that? Reading this book, one is reminded of just what a dangerous enterprise Canada was. I mean, for the people who made Canada. And make no mistake about it, what we call Canada is an entirely a European foundation. I'm always amused when I hear these politicians lauding immigrants. Oh, yes, they made the decision to come here. Oh, a difficult journey, was it? No, they went to the airport and got on a plane. And, they land at Pearson or at Vancouver International. A harrowing journey. The Grace clan came to Canada in 1840. John Grace was the first. And this was before the famine. He was not an immigrant. He was a settler. And this was dangerous. Before the invention of the steamship, any travel over water was dangerous. The woman he married, Helena Ringrose, came to Canada a year later in 1841. And of the 900 people on the ship she was on, 300 of them survived because Montreal was just a death trap for immigrants, and many, many thousands of them ended up at the bottom of the water. So Desmond Morton begins with talking about, what we used to call Dominion Day in Canada. At midnight on July the 1st, 1867, church bells rang out from Lunenburg to Sarnia. In Ottawa, militia artillery fired the first round of a 100-gun salute. Crowds cheered the explosions and waited as the militiamen labored in the dark with rammers and sponges. At dawn, 4 million people awoke as the citizens of a new Dominion of Canada. Some of them in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia might resent their fate, but a 2-day weekend for July the 1st fell on a Monday. It was too rare a treat to be shunned. Picnics, lacrosse tournaments, cricket matches, and excursions focused the day's excitement. Farm families united around groaning kitchen tables. On Toronto's waterfront, a huge ox was roasted all day so that dripping hunks of meat could be distributed to the poor. Carefully respecting the ban on Sabbath labor, George Brown arrived at the offices of his Globe at midnight, determined to do editorial justice to events he had helped to bring about. As the morning hours passed, his pen filled page after page with statistics, politics, history, business, and hope for the new Dominion. Only at dawn was Brown finished. Solemnly, he pledged that the teeming millions who shall populate the northern part of this continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, shall, under a wise and just government, reap the fruit of well-directed enterprise, honest industry, and religious principles. By then, the express trains that normally carried the Globe to readers across the old province of Canada West had departed without it. Brown's aspirations for Canada would go largely unread. Of course, I'm reminded by this passage that Toronto was a very different place not that long ago, actually. I believe it was only in the 1970s that Toronto's blue laws were entirely repealed. I believe it was not until the 1970s that you could go to the movie theater on a Sunday. And Toronto was a Presbyterian town. It was known as Toronto the Good. Now, Toronto delights in its delusion that it is somehow the New York City of Canada. So we are reminded of the growth of Upper and Lower Canada and of the different visions for Canada that the founders had in this book. The conflicts between the fur traders and those who wanted to establish Lower Canada as an agricultural polity. And rather incredibly, it seems that that the Crown considered New France to be an extravagance that they could do without. That their money and their time was better spent elsewhere. And of course, this divorce between New France and Old France can still be seen today. You know, I'm reminded that a story about, I believe it was Guy Lafleur, one of the greatest ever hockey players, who vacationed in France every summer, and he confessed to an interviewer that when he goes to France, he speaks English, not French, because he said he got fed up with snooty French waiters, you know, mocking his accent, you know, by pretending that they couldn't understand him. Je ne comprends pas, monsieur. That sort of thing. But no, there is a considerable difference between the Quebecois and the French. And we find out, well, let's talk about the First Nations. That the First Nations got heavily involved in the disputes between the French and the English. And it would appear that the French backed the wrong horse, that is to say, the Huron. Oh, and while we're talking about genocide, I would appreciate getting an apology from the Iroquois for their genocide of the Huron. But I suppose we're not going to get that. Morton writes, blockaded by the Royal Navy, preoccupied by wars with its European neighbors, France could spare only a few thousand regular troops to back its gamble in the New World. Louisbourg, the fortress built on Cape Breton Island to protect the approaches to the St. Lawrence, fell in 1758 because France had too few warships to relieve it. The French military commander in New France, the Marquis de Montcalm, detested his superior, the Canadian-born governor Pierre de Rigaud, Marquis de Vaudreuil. Their rivalry, far more than the gross corruption of the last intendant, Francois Bigot, doomed the colony. Montcalm's regulars won frequently against incredible odds, notably at the Battle of Quirong or Ticonderoga in 1758. But when the British besieged Quebec in 1759 and General James Wolfe clambered up to the Plains of Abraham on September the 12th, Montcalm's insistence on mixing Canadian militia with his soldiers led to confusion in the French ranks, panic flight, and a sudden end to resistance. In the struggle for Quebec, French and Canadians discovered how little they still had in common. I'm reminded that some years ago, John Muggeridge, who was one of Malcolm Muggeridge's son, he immigrated to Canada, and he married a woman, Anne, who was a delightful woman and writer, who I interviewed several times. John Muggeridge had an article in the American Spectator where he was talking about Canadian history, and he thought it absolutely bizarre that the line from Canada's elite with regard to 1759 was forget the Plains of Abraham. Well, why would that be? Because mention of it offends the Quebecois? Well, considering the sweet deal they got from Canada, a deal that they certainly would not have been offered in the United States, it smacks of ingratitude. But you can draw a very strong parallel between Canada's treatment of Quebec and its treatment of its Native Indians, which is to say, the more that you give them, the more that they demand, and the unhappier they become. So forget the Plains of Abraham. And Muggeridge said, can you imagine, Americans demanding forget the Alamo? Well, actually, Muggeridge didn't live to see it, but that's exactly what we hear in the United States. Let's see. John Simcoe was a great figure in Canadian history. If the Champlain was the founder of New France, Upper Canada was almost as much the creation of John Simcoe, a successful commander of Loyalist troops. Upper Canada's first lieutenant governor wanted to reverse the verdict of the American Revolution. With incredible optimism, Colonel Simcoe imagined that he could make a raw, backwoods colony so attractive that Americans would repent their disloyalty and renew their allegiance. His energy matched his ambition. Survey parties vanished into the forest to lay out the gridiron of concession and side roads that still shapes rural Ontario. Soldiers and settlers drove highways of the future through swamp and bush. Yonge Street, north from Lake Ontario to Lake Simcoe. Dundas Street, west from Yonge Street to Hamilton and to the tiny inland settlement of London. The Kingston Road struggled eastward to the garrison town where Frontenac had once built his fort. Simcoe relocated his capital from Niagara-on-the-Lake to the junction of those roads in malarial lakeside swamps at the muddy little village of York. London, his first choice, had been vetoed as too remote. From his little bungalow, Simcoe dictated letters, dispatches, and instructions, and promoted a flood of proposals from everything from hat making to a mining industry. His wife, Elizabeth, drew, painted, and wrote letters and diaries in which she left a sometimes sympathetic picture of Upper Canada's first developer. To prosper, Upper Canada needed far more than the 14,000 people who had reached it by 1791. To be a bustling success story, the province must be a haven for all who, Simcoe boldly predicted, would soon weary of the mismanagement and corruption of the American Republic. Unmoved by warnings and protests by loyalists, Simcoe summoned any of His Majesty's late subjects to renew their allegiance in return for excellent free land. People came. Allegiance was a small matter on the frontier. Land was everything. Upper Canada's lower peninsula between Lake Erie and Lake Huron was directly in the path of the American frontier surge. Simcoe's critics sneered at late loyalists, but a steady flow of ox teams with their overloaded wagons poured into the colony. By 1811, almost 90,000 people had settled in Upper Canada. Distinctions between early and late loyalists had been worn down by the common pioneering experience. By then, however, Simcoe had been gone for 15 years. He was not even knighted for his services. His successors were lesser men, reluctant exiles in a colonial backwater of long winters and steaming, mosquito-ridden summers. Most of Simcoe's vision left with him, but the people still came, for by now even the colony's tiny elite had realized that their huge land grants were almost worthless without the pressure of settlement. A fertile tract grew in value if surrounded by prospering farms. Meanwhile, the elite planned to live respectably in town on the salary and profits of government office. Of course, as it turns out, Ontario's capital was finally located at a place called Bytown, later renamed Ottawa, which is one of the worst places in North America. Diabolically hot, humid, and mosquito-ridden in summer, and almost unbelievably cold in winter. A curious choice, one might say. Again, this is a book, 363 pages, at least in my ebook edition. It is a short history of Canada. Of course, there are multi-volume histories of Canada, but this is just the right length for any foreigner who would like a basic grasp of my country, or for any Canadian who, say, was not educated properly at schools, which would be most of them, as we can learn by reading stories where apparently we learn that Queen Victoria had something to do with residential schools, or maybe that James Cook had something to do with residential schools. So, in closing, I highly recommend Desmond Morton's A Short History of Canada, and it's now up to its 7th edition. So, to round out the show, I will talk about what is coming up next week. On Music Monday, I am going to be discussing Serge Gainsbourg, the famous French songwriter, a singer, impresario, and a provocateur. And on Theater Thursday, I am talking about a recent film from 2017, Sean Baker's The Florida Project. And on the book club next week, I am going to be discussing Edward J. Epstein's The Annals of Unsolved Crime. Let's have a final look at the chat. Ultra Testosterone says mRNA two-shot COVID-19 for younger people, risky, can cause cardiac inflammation, chest issues, yes, myocarditis, which typically you need a heart transplant or you will die. And as Carl Denninger was pointed out, yes, the drug companies have been fully shielded from lawsuits. These vaccines were given emergency authorization only. But when you go for your heart transplant operation and you are handed a bill for several hundreds of thousands of dollars, well, I guess the drug company is not going to pick up the tab, is it? Don Willis says Weinstein has no other platforms yet, as far as I know, no backup plan. How dare, how even liberals question the machine. Reaction data of mRNA for pregnant women also not great. My trail of disgrace. Yes, an 88% miscarriage rate as opposed to the baseline of 10%. Now, the drug companies warned about this explicitly when the drug was rolled out, but the media, for reasons of its own, decided to bury this information. Contracoup says St. Fauci himself had once written on the effectiveness of that which shall not be named in the treatment of other coronavirus infections. Oh, well, it's the science, as he likes to say. How come I'm saying the opposite of what I was saying 6 months ago, which was the opposite of saying 6 months before that? It's the science. It's always changing. It's a topsy-turvy world we live in. Jim Bowden says, why does Bill Gates insist on vaccinating the whole world? He's not an elected politician or a doctor. Yeah, okay. Apparently he's now the largest private landholder in the United States. He's going to be building a whole bunch of Pottersvilles. I mean, going back to what Kotkin was saying, and I will return to Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State next week. This is exactly what Belloc predicted, that a modern version of slavery is being created, that we are being turned into serfs. That what's the argument? What is the argument for this? You can't have the life that your grandfather had. Maybe you can't have the life that your father had, and you're not gonna have a job anymore. You'll have a whole bunch of gigs, and you won't get benefits with these, but you'll get by somehow. You'll be constantly changing your career, and you won't make enough money to have children. You probably won't make enough money to, have a wife. But there's free porn on the internet, and you'll probably have enough money to, buy an Xbox. So, that's pretty good, right? It's not a very inspiring vision of the future. Jim Bow says, KMG, is it really your birthday? Yes. If so, happy birthday. You are my favorite Canadian undertaker. Okay, 150 degrees here in Sydney, mate. I'm reminded of Barry Humphries, who back in the 1960s, when he was associated with Private Eye magazine, he had a cartoon strip in there. Was later made into a movie, 2 movies, actually. And so Barry Humphries he's narrating a traditional Australian Christmas. And he begins with the temperature at 100 degrees, and then it's 110, and the temperature has now reached 130 degrees, and it's so hot that the narrator's voice is shaking. And here we are sitting before a roaring fire, telling spine-chilling ghost stories. Very, very amusing. Okay. And the final cheat, you will own nothing and you will be happy, says Brandon Smith. Neil Terry says, remember, if you have the means, support what you love. Only good people get any revenue from me these days. Thank you to Media Hits. Enjoy your day, night, KMG. Great show. Thank you, Don Willis. I like to watch Sky News from Oz, says Birkin Sultanov. Okay, so thank you so much for all of you who tuned in. And I'll be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Yes, I will be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, at 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which is appreciated at all times, but especially appreciated at this uncertain juncture in my life, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations can be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and societal collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. And a happy 4th of July weekend to my American friends and all those who love America. Good night.